text, if you look at the pages of the Quran, if you read it as a whole, what you'll find is that certain character types are identified and come to the fore. And one way of being guided and trying to find some sort of guidance through the Quran is to understand your life and your challenges and your existence in terms of those character types. Now, I'm just going to go through some of those character types, maybe 4 or 5, and then you can see how to think through the Quran and how to make the Quran become real and contemporary to you. Now, the first character type that, of course, is the most commonly mentioned character type in the Holy Text is the word mu'min. And this means somebody who endorses, who embraces, who accedes to, who admits to, who affirms. And what it refers to in history are those people who, in fact, accepted or embraced or endorsed the message that the Prophet brought. So they embraced him firstly, they understood him to be a man of honor, man of truth, and then they had no problem embracing the message that he was giving. So they embraced the code. And when we speak about the mu'min, we mean those people who embrace the code. And so when we say that you embrace, you become a mu'min, it means that you embrace the code of conduct, the divine code of conduct. And that is what a believer is. So a believer is somebody that embraces and endorses and aligns with the divinely sanctioned code of conduct. And that's it. That's a believer. And there are many believers. I mean, there are believers everywhere. Some call themselves Muslim. Some might not even call themselves Muslim. But they would adhere to a divinely sanctioned code of conduct. Of course, the most succinct and the most reliable repository or container of that conduct is the Holy Quran, is the text of the Quran, is the finally revealed revelation from God. And so that is the shortest route to getting to align or to embrace the code of conduct, is simply to sign off on the Quran and to embrace it and to endorse it and to adopt it as a code of conduct. Now, it does become clear from the verses of the Quran that there are many levels of embraces. So you could have embraces that are sort of mediocre in their commitment to the code. I mean, there are those who are very stringent and very meticulous in the observance of the code. So in terms of embracing the code, those who are the mu'mineen, the alladhina amanu, that the Quran refers to constantly. And of course, when the Quran speaks about ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, it refers to those that have embraced the code, that have signed off on the code of conduct, on the system of belief and practice. And it will then hold you accountable in terms of that commitment. But the Quran does concede that there are many people who will not really be able to uphold the code at all times perfectly, and it makes allowance for that. And that is why the idea of istighfar, of forgiveness, comes in. And we are often reminded and asked to make amends, ask forgiveness, to redeem ourselves. Of course, if you commit a major breach and you indulge in it continuously, and then of course you lose that membership as a member of the code of conduct, you can then not be called a mu'min. Then you should be called a fasiq. And a fasiq is somebody that flouts the code. So it's the same as a mu'min. If you flout the code, you become a Muslim in poor standing, and we call that a fasiq. Right? So let's look at the second character type that the Quran speaks about, that type, and that is what is called the unbelievers, as Yusuf Ali calls them. Of course, I don't translate it as unbelievers. I translate that to denialists. So in other words, as opposed to those who affirm, to to those who endorse, those who embrace, commonly translated as the believers, but the mu'mineen, as opposed to the mu'mineen, there is what is called the kuffar, or the kafir. Now the kafir, the word kafara means to cover, and to conceal, and to obstruct. So that is the literal meaning, but we can't always go on literal meanings. The meaning really becomes clear when you read the verses of the Qur'an, and then you are able to see what is the kafir, right? And so the kafir in the Qur'an are those who deny and obstruct and oppose, right? So they are those who, first of all, they don't admit to the code. They deny the code. They reject the code. They reject the idea that there is a code, and that the code, or that there is the particular code that is divinely sanctioned. Those are the kuffar. But kuffar are also at various levels. You get those who reject. The only requirement for you to be a rejecter is that you deny or disaffirm or repudiate the code. And if you reject the code, you are a kafir. If you reject the idea that there is a divinely sanctioned code of conduct that exists, that has been revealed, that appears in the form of the Quran or in any other rationally deductible form, because you can deduct the code rationally, believe it or not, that the Quran comes to confirm. Remember, the Quran is a confirmant of what has come previously and what people can themselves arrive at. So man, left to his own devices, is able to arrive at an understanding of a divine creator, of a supreme intelligence, of righteous behavior. There are certain pre-programmed propensities and dispositions within us that will draw us to the code, even without the Quran. We must remember that. And that is why what I always say, that there are those who are not Muslim who might be adherents to the code, who might be, as the Quran speaks about them, the hunafa, those who have arrived at the code completely independently, hunafa, the hanif, those who are monotheists, who are restrained in their behavior, who are respectful and just human beings, all on their own. It's possible, right? So the kuffar are those who reject all of those forms of commitment or code. They reject the idea of this code. They might have their own codes, but they reject this idea. So that is the kuffar. The highest form of kufr, and the Quran often doesn't stipulate this clearly, but the highest form of kuffar, of kafir, of kufr, is to go to war against those who want to institute and uphold the divine code. So if somebody comes along and they would like to institute the divine code in their life or in their country or in their community, and that divine code, we know it, it's there, it's clear, so it's the abolition of interest, recognition of the rights of women, feeding of the poor, the defenseless, defending the defenseless. It is and controlling anything that is detrimental or harmful to human beings. It is the respect and honoring of the parents. It is the refraining from fawahish, to constrain and to control sexual promiscuity, illicitness. It is to prevent an elite from exploiting. You see, the code is that. That is the code. The code is about a system that is fair, just, wholesome, healthy, morally clean, respectful of human life, respectful of all human beings. That is the code, right? So that is the code. It's there. It's enshrined in the Holy Quran. Read the verses and you'll see it speaks about all of those things. Those who admit to the code and who want to institute the code are the believers. Those who want to prevent that code from being instituted and are prepared to go to war are the kuffar. Right, so are you able to make the connection between the text of the Quran and our times? Because in our times, it's very clear to see who are those people who are trying to institute or implement or defend the code. That's very, very clear. If any nation, if any person comes and wants to institute the divinely sanctioned code, whether he calls it Islam or whether he has not yet called it Islam, whether he doesn't know it is Islam, that person should be supported and defended. That person should be supported and defended, and those who wage war against that person are the kuffar. You see, the problem is you want to make everything a Muslim, non-Muslim issue, and then you become confused when the Muslims are the biggest oppressors. Because that's what we are dealing with. We're dealing with the Muslim countries who are in fact oppressors, who are in fact destroyers or deniers of the code. So the fact of Muslim and non-Muslim is not related to your status of Iman. Your status of Muslim, there's a verse in the Qur'an that says they say they are mu'min. They are not mu'min. They are Muslim. A Muslim is somebody who has simply agreed or acceded or compliant with the code, but is not committed to the code. Right? So, for example, commit transgressions in the business dealings. Right? They are those, right, who are honest in their business dealings. But they do so because they're afraid they're going to be caught out by the revenue service or by whoever. They are, in fact, Muslim. They are compliant but not committed. So to be a mu'min, it means you comply with the way you conduct your business. You conduct your business in a fair way without any cheating when it comes to, supplying your customers or procuring from your suppliers. But you're not doing that because you are afraid of getting caught. You do that because you understand and believe the meaning of honesty in business. So I just want to draw the distinction between the mu'min. Those are the people who embrace and endorse and affirm and implement the code, whether it is through the Qur'an or whether it is through their own efforts, Right. That's the mu'minin. The second group are the kuffar. Those are the people that deny, dispute, obstruct, and eventually wage war on anyone that wants to implement the divine code. Right. Now I'm going to move on a bit. I want to mention a few other categories. The category in the Qur'an is a category in the Qur'an that is referred to by Yusuf Ali in his translation as the hypocrites. The hypocrites, right? So I don't agree with that translation. The hypocrites is not really, hypocrite is a term that goes back to the church and to, it is a bit of an Israeliyat. It is a little bit of a imposition of a biblical term on Islam. And the term really is not hypocrite. The term in the Qur'an is munafiq. Now, a munafiq, it comes from the word nafaqa, munafiq. It is somebody who pretends to do it or to give it. Right? It is somebody who feigns, who is not really sincere in the efforts. Now, if you look at the Qur'an and you analyze the terms, you look at it throughout, and there's actually 27 cases that Yusuf Ali, that from his translation that one can identify. If you look at all those cases, then the concept of a munafiq is more appropriately defined as a dubious character. It is a person of dubious distinction. And what does that mean? It comes down to a person that lacks reliability, that lacks authenticity, that lacks sincerity. And that is a munafiq. A munafiq is somebody that does not even have the courage to declare kufr. Do you understand? So you have somebody that is a kafir. He has the strength or the guts to say, I'm not admitting to this code, I reject it. I'll go to war even if his level of kufr reaches that extent. The munafiq does not have that courage. So the munafiq, in fact, makes a dubious commitment to the code. But he's unreliable, and he vacillates You see, by vacillating, I mean, he will abandon the code if he finds it to be at odds with his immediate needs, fears, apprehensions, short-term needs. So if you put some money in front of the munafiq, or you put some fear in him, he will abandon the code. He will backstab those who are in the camp of the believers or in the camp of the mu'mineen. And that is really what a munafiq is. It's a person of dubious distinction. And if we look around us today, if you look at global politics, if you look at your own friends, if you look at your own country, you will find that there are forces in the country that I like to refer to as the fifth column. You know, the fifth column was actually, like, the term I think was invented in the Second World Wars. Those people who vacillate, who are prepared to abandon or to break ranks when they are sufficiently scared or sufficiently enticed. And that is really what we mean by the munafiqeen. And the munafiqeen could have a Muslim name, it could have any name. It doesn't, stop looking at things through Muslim glasses or through Muslim perspectives. There are those who are believers who are defending right and righteousness, such as Julian Assange. I always take him as an example. Yes, if you want to give me a lot of weak faults of Julian Assange, go ahead. The Qur'an doesn't make the believers perfect. All right. If he's an atheist, pray for him. I don't know if he's an atheist, but there are some people who are agnostic and who might be potential believers if you stop telling them that they are kafir. You see, I'd like to see these people as potential believers. So let's say I'm a guy like that. So those people who desert and break ranks with him, or who go quiet when they have to defend a person like that, those are all counted as deserters and munafiqeen, my brothers and sisters. You need to close ranks with all those who are advancing the general cause of righteousness, justice, respect for humanity, respect for the sacredness of human life. You need to close ranks with all those people. And if you are weak and you desert them, you have complied with one aspect of nifaq, of being a munafiq. So I've got the mu'mineen, the affirmers of the code. I've got the kuffar, the denialists, the deniers of the code, those who are at war with the code. I've got the hypocrites, those who are feigning or pretending adherence to the code, but are in fact vacillating in terms of the code. Right? I'm going to give you a completely new category, the Ahlul Kitab, the people of the book, the people of doctrine. What is the Ahlul Kitab? You see, if you look at the Ahlul Kitab, it's a also a very common term in the Quran. If you look at Yusuf Ali's translation, there's 83 cases of people of the book appearing. Right? And the website is search-the-Quran.com. Search-the-Quran.com. If you want to go and look at all those cases. So, what is the Ahlul Kitab? If you read all those cases, if you take the effort and you read all those cases, what you'll come to the conclusion with is that the Ahlul Kitab are those who are the promoters and the defenders of doctrine. The promoters and the defenders of doctrine. The doctrinal, the indoctrinated. My brothers, go and read the Quran and you'll see what I'm telling you is exactly the best explanation. The doctrinal, the indoctrinated are those people who put their doctrines above everything else. It's people who are indoctrinated by the text, by their own books, and by their own understanding and by their own scriptures. Now, in modern terms, we would call them the ideological, or the ideologues. The ideologues, those have have developed and embellished and created doctrines which they become slaves to. That's the Ahlul Kitab. Now, it doesn't matter, once again, you're always thinking of Ahlul Kitab as the Jews and the Christians, because that's what Muslims do. We are reducing the Quran to these little grooves. We just want to fall into those grooves. When you hear Ahlul Kitab, that's the Jews and the Christians. No, that is how you massacre the Quran. You can't massacre the Quran. You need to open your mind. The Ahlul Kitab are anyone who is indoctrinated and doctrinal in their outlook. Whereas Islam is not a book of doctrines. Islam, the book of God, the Qur'an is not a book of doctrines. It is a book of divine admission and the practice that goes with that. So let's say, I want to give you examples of Ahlul Kitab in our times. Who are the people who have become indoctrinated and doctrinal? The Ash'ari. The Ash'ari, have you heard the word Aqidah? Aqidah. And when you speak to any Muslim, they're always telling you, you must be careful, you are going against your Aqidah. What they're basically saying is that our doctrines, our core doctrines, and if you look at Ash'ari, when people speak about the Aqidah, what that is a euphemism for is that they are in fact defending their doctrines. Now, what is Ash'ari Aqidah? Ash'ari Aqidah is a list of about 8 or 10 doctrines that the Muslim has to embrace and adopt. And there's the Maturidiyya Aqidah, and then there's the Shia Aqidah, and then there is, you see, it is a commitment and an adherence to a set of core untested beliefs ascribed to the holy founders or the holy priests of that order. And of course, what we need to do is we need to test every core belief in terms of the Quran. And some of these core beliefs are not tested in terms of the Quran. And so therefore you will find Christian Aqidah, or the Christian core doctrine of the Trinity, is denied in the Quran. The Quran in fact says stop saying three. It's not a substantiated doctrine. The Jews will come with a doctrine of a chosen people, and that the chosen people has a certain particular standing with respect to the divine, with respect to God. And again, the Quran denies that doctrine as unsubstantiated. Now today, if the Quran was revealed today, it would probably look at some of the core beliefs of the Muslims even and call them unsubstantiated. Because some of the beliefs are unsubstantiated. The belief that hadith is a core expression of the will of Allah. The books of Bukhari, the books of Muslim, the books of holy men are all an expression of the will of God. It is in fact in any case denied in the Quran. Do you write words with your own hand and call it the code of Allah? The Quran asks that question. Do you write words with your own hands and call that the code of Allah? So the core beliefs, the doctrines of the Muslims, of the Christians, of the Jews, even of some secular modern societies. Like if you look at the Frankfurt School and of postmodernism, you see, and the teachings of the Frankfurt School, it is an ideologically founded position, going back to the original Frankfurt School of the early 20th century. And that school teaches a set of cultural and ideological political positions that constitute an aqidah for the modern Westerner. Right? And if you look at universities generally, then a lot of what their ideological position is grounded in the aqidah of Frankfurt, of neo-Marxism or cultural Marxism. Now, it's also an aqidah. It is an aqidah, it is an ideological position, it is a doctrinal position, and it is a position that justifies and it shapes people's behavior. So the Frankfurt School is just another form of Aqidah. It's another form of ideological position. It is in many ways unfounded, although there are often in many doctrines there's a basis to it. Like, for example, if we say that the Aqidah of the Muslim is that there is none worthy of worship but God, then that is a sound position. It is a wholesome position. If the Mu'tazila or the Shia or whoever states that God is just and it is impossible for God not to be just, then that is a sound and wholesome teaching or ideological position that is founded in the Holy Quran. So people of the book, in fact, are not necessarily subject to condemnation, and that is how the Quranic speaks about the people of the book. The people of the book are decent, kind, genuine people, but they falter when it comes to commitment to the Aqidah instead of commitment to rational thinking and to the book of the text, the code from God. So that is the people of the book. They can be righteous, but they often allow themselves to be detracted or to go astray because of their commitment to their ideological positions. The same with Marxism. You see, if you're a Marxist ideologically, you will be stuck in a particular mode because you are unable to compromise on some of your Marxist Aqidah positions. If you're a new liberal capitalist, if that is your ideological position and you admit to it and you stick to it, or if you're a statist, or if you're by statist I mean a secular nationalist, that is an Aqidah. And the Quran clearly spells out that people of the book, people of doctrine, people who are ideologically committed instead of committed to truth and to rationality and to reflexivity, those people have a problem. They hit the mark, and often their doctrinal position hijacks them and keeps them away from what is true. And the Quran, in fact, states that some of the people of the book will be kuffar. Some of the people of the book, because of their ideological position, will in fact go to war with those who are fighting for justice and righteousness. So that is terrible. I mean, if you're so ideologically committed to your Shiism, to your Sunnism, to your Asharism, to your communism, to your neoliberalism, to your Frankfurt cultural Marxism, that you are prepared to go against those who are simply and purely establishing what is just and righteous, then you have categorized yourself as a kafir. You have unfortunately joined the ranks of the kuffar, and you're blind at commitment to your doctrines brought to you by your scholars, your priests. They have misled you. That is the people of the book. Be very careful. Your first commitment is the code and God, not the doctrines that people create without substantiation. And always test any doctrine for substantiation in the holy text. Most of the Aqidah that Muslims admit to, or the core doctrines, are not founded in the Quran. Some of it, I don't know if it's most, many of them, such as innamal a'malu binniyat, all actions are judged by the intention. It's a false doctrine. Actions are not judged by their intentions. That appears nowhere in the Quran. It's a false doctrine if you believe in it, because it means that we can excuse all the worst excesses in the world simply because those people thought they were doing a good thing. Right. Next category. I've done mu'min, I've done kafir, I've done the munafiq, I've done the ahlul kitab, the people of the book, and I'm going to come now to the majority of people. The majority of people. And that is simply man. Insan. Now, insan as opposed to nas. Because insan is different to the way nas the Quran refers to an-nas, humanity. And often it will address humanity. It will say, Ya ayyuhan nas. But insan is a different category. Insan, if you should want to go and look at this website and look at Yusuf Ali's use, you need to sift through and see where insan is in fact used. What you will find that insan is not really humanity. It is humanity in its gullible sense. You see, so if I translate insan, and I would instead use the term gullible man or gullible men and women. So insan is man in his full frailty, in his full gullibility, right? In his weakness, as a creature prone to deception, prone to suggestion, prone to wavering. And so insan is a category, is man in his gullible sense. And the Quran, I would say, if I was to look at modern day man in our society, I'm going to draw the understanding that insan is actually the majority of people, the sheeple, the gullible people who are prepared to exchange a lifetime of slavery and oppression for a small little bit of comfort now. So they are prepared to put off the real fight, the real war, the real sacrifice, because they are happy to be an inferior, subdued human being on earth. That is insan. Now, insan, obviously, they become fodder for the kuffar, or they become munafiqeen. They are the human being yet to be categorized and not yet reached, who has not yet reached his really full independence as a liberated human being. He's still a semi-slave, a beholden creature, a creature that is subject to influences and subject to deception. And like I say, I think the word sheeple, if you've seen that word come up, or the sleepwalkers, I sometimes call them the sleepwalkers, are these people who just go along with the main narrative, with the master narrative, and they are unwilling or unable to be critical about what they are being fed into their minds. Now I'm going to go to the last. I want to do one more. Let's quickly do a final one, and that is the muttaqeen. The muttaqeen. What are the muttaqeen? Because as you get people of the book, these are people who are doctrinal, ideological, right? Those who restrain, those who are guarded, those who are conscientious are the muttaqeen. The muttaqeen are conscientious, restrained and guided. Now, once again, do not think of Muslims first. Do not think of Muslims first, because the Quran says, Ya dhalika al-kitabu la rayba fihi hudal lil-muttaqeen. That places the muttaqeen before a priori. It is, you are muttaqi before you engage with a code. So you can be a muttaqi before you are a Muslim. But of course, a muttaqin is often linked with ittaqullah, is to link restraint, to link the conscientiousness with God, to be conscientious for a purpose, and that is because you admit that God exists. You admit to God. But you can be a muttaqin a priori. And what is a muttaqin? It is somebody who is thoughtful, conscientious, and restrained. Now that is another character type that you can apply to our times. There are many nations, many people who are not Muslims, but they are thoughtful, they are considerate, they are conscientious, and they are restrained in their behavior. So they don't just go around shouting abuse or taking untested positions or following blindly or acting on their emotions or just being, and I know so many people like that who are not Muslim. I'm sure you also know people like that. They are restrained in their approach to the world and to you and to everyone. They don't drink excessively, they don't get involved in narcotics, they don't get involved in illicit, sex and permissive behavior. They generally take a position of being guarded and being restrained and exercising some control on their own behavior. And those are the muttaqin. Now, the best thing that can happen to a muttaqin is to embrace and to uphold the code. If you marry the code with the muttaqin, you get the best of creation. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.